The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Redemption Creek, Arizona Territory, 1878, as Jedediah Maddox's spurs clinked ominously with each deliberate step toward the saloon. The townspeople scurried out of his path like frightened prairie dogs, their eyes downcast, afraid to meet the cold, murderous gaze that had earned him the nickname Mad Dog Maddox throughout the Western Territories. The towering cowboy's face was a weathered map of violence, a jagged scar running from his right temple to the corner of his mouth, courtesy of a Comanche raid that had claimed his family 10 years prior. His eyes, once a warm hazel, now reflected only the callous emptiness of a man who'd long since buried his humanity beneath layers of vengeance and whiskey. "Evening, Mr. Maddox," stammered the saloon keeper, hands trembling as he poured the usual 3 fingers of whiskey, neat. Jedediah didn't acknowledge the greeting, just tossed back the amber liquid and slammed the empty glass on the countertop. Another. 3 drinks later, the familiar numbness began to spread through his limbs, dulling the constant rage that had been his only companion since that blood-soaked day a decade ago. Outside, thunder rolled across the vast Arizona sky, promising a storm to match the one that perpetually raged in his soul. The saloon doors swung open, letting in a gust of wind that scattered playing cards across the worn plank floor. The piano player's fingers froze mid-chord as every eye turned toward the entrance. Standing there, drenched from the sudden downpour, was a woman unlike any Redemption Creek had seen before. Pearl Goodwin stood straight-backed despite her obvious exhaustion, her simple blue traveling dress muddied at the hem but otherwise neat. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical bun, though several tendrils had escaped to frame a face that spoke of gentle determination rather than conventional beauty. "I'm looking for Sheriff Tanner," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "I was told he could direct me to the property I've purchased." The bartender's eyebrows shot up. "You're the one who bought the old Hargrove place?" "I am," she replied, removing her soaked gloves. "Is there a problem with that?" A low chuckle rippled through the room, and Jedediah found himself studying her more closely. The Hargrove Ranch had been abandoned for years after Apache raiders had killed the family, just another blood-soaked piece of frontier real estate that no sane person would touch. "Lady, that land's cursed," someone called out. "Nothing grows there but graves." Pearl's chin lifted slightly. "Then it's fortunate I didn't come here to grow crops." Jedediah knocked back another whiskey, uninterested in the foolish woman's death wish. It wasn't his concern if some eastern greenhorn wanted to get herself killed. The territories were littered with the bones of dreamers and fools. Sheriff Tanner stepped forward, his weathered face showing concern. "Miss Goodwin, I'd be happy to show you to your property in the morning, but perhaps you should reconsider. That land—" "I'm well aware of its history, Sheriff," she interrupted gently. "And I've traveled too far to be dissuaded now. If you could direct me to a place to stay tonight, I'll be on my way at first light." Jedediah stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He'd heard enough. Another idealistic fool would soon learn the harsh lessons of the frontier, but he wouldn't be around to witness it. He tossed coins onto the bar and headed for the door. As he brushed past Pearl Goodwin, their eyes met briefly. Instead of the fear or revulsion he was accustomed to seeing in people's faces, he found only calm assessment in her steady gaze. Something about that look devoid of judgment yet full of quiet strength unsettled him more than any gunslinger's challenge. "Pardon me," she said simply, stepping aside. Jedediah grunted and pushed through the doors into the rain, trying to shake off the strange feeling her presence had stirred within him. He had no time for distractions, especially in the form of a woman clearly unprepared for the brutality of territory life. The following morning dawned clear and bright, the previous night's storm leaving behind only puddles and a freshly washed sky. Jedediah sat cleaning his revolver at a table outside the general store when the commotion began. Pearl Goodwin was loading supplies into a small wagon, methodically checking items off a list as the storekeeper's wife helped her. "You're really determined to go out there alone?" the older woman asked, concern evident in her voice. "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Abernathy, but I'll be fine," Pearl replied with a smile. "God doesn't give us challenges we can't overcome with faith and hard work." Jedediah nearly snorted aloud at her naivety. God, if such a being existed, had abandoned these lands long ago, leaving only blood and dust in his wake. As if sensing his scornful thoughts, Pearl glanced over. Again, there was that unnerving directness in her gaze, as though she could see right through the fearsome persona to the broken man beneath. Jedediah scowled and returned his attention to his weapon. "Mr. Maddox," Sheriff Tanner's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Got a minute?" Jedediah looked up reluctantly. "What do you want, Tanner?" The sheriff lowered his voice. "I know you patrol out near the Hargrove place sometimes. Would it trouble you to keep an eye on Miss Goodwin? Just until she comes to her senses and heads back east." "Not my problem," Jedediah replied flatly. "I'm offering to pay you," Tanner persisted. "The stagecoach was robbed twice last month, and the Clement gang's been spotted near the territory border. A woman alone out there." "Then convince her to leave," Jedediah snapped. "She's as stubborn as they come. Says she's fulfilling her brother's dying wish. He bought that land site unseen before passing from consumption." Something flickered in Jedediah's memory, a sense of obligation that had once been as natural to him as breathing, before grief and vengeance had hollowed him out. He glanced at Pearl again, noting the quiet efficiency with which she worked, the lack of complaint despite the curious and often judgmental stares from the townspeople. $3 a day, Jedediah said finally. "And I'm not playing nursemaid. I'll ride by once a day for 2 weeks. After that, she's on her own." Relief flooded Tanner's face. Done. Pearl departed Redemption Creek with little fanfare, her small wagon loaded with only the essentials: tools, seeds, preserved foods, and a few personal belongings. Jedediah followed at a distance, staying just close enough to keep the wagon in sight as it bumped along the rutted trail toward the foothills. The Hargrove property came into view by midday, a small, weathered cabin nestled against a backdrop of juniper and pine, with a dilapidated barn and corral nearby. A stream trickled along the property's edge, providing the only reliable water source for miles. It might have been picturesque if not for the dark history that clung to it like a shroud. Jedediah watched from the ridgeline as Pearl circled the property slowly, seeming to take inventory of the challenges ahead. Then, surprising him, she knelt in the dust outside the cabin, bowed her head, and appeared to pray before rising and getting to work. For 3 days, Jedediah observed from a distance as Pearl methodically tackled the abandoned homestead. She cleared debris, repaired what she could of the cabin's roof, and dug out the choked spring. Not once did she falter or break down, though the task before her would have daunted men twice her size. On the 4th day, as thunderheads gathered on the horizon, Jedediah noticed movement at the edge of the property, 3 riders watching the cabin with obvious interest. His hand instinctively went to his revolver as he recognized Jonas Clement, the leader of the notorious gang that had been terrorizing the territory. Cursing under his breath, Jedediah urged his horse forward, cutting down the slope toward the cabin. He arrived just as the 3 men approached Pearl, who stood calmly on her porch, a shotgun held loosely but confidently in her hands. "Afternoon, gentlemen," she called out. "If you're looking for water for your horses, you're welcome to use the stream." Jonas Clement removed his hat with exaggerated politeness. "Much obliged, madam. Didn't expect to find such a lovely lady out here all alone." "I'm never alone," Pearl replied evenly. "God watches over his children everywhere." The men laughed, and Clement's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Well, now, I reckon he might be looking the other way just now. She's not alone, Jedediah called out, riding into the clearing, his revolver drawn. And you boys are trespassing. Clement's hand hovered near his gun. Mad Dog Maddox. Didn't figure you for playing protector to some Bible-thumping spinster. I'm being paid to keep an eye on the property, Jedediah replied coldly. Nothing more. Now move on before this gets messy. A tense silence stretched between them before Clement finally shrugged. Another time, perhaps. He nodded to Pearl with mock civility. Madam. As the riders departed, Pearl lowered her shotgun and regarded Jedediah with those unsettlingly direct eyes. Thank you, Mr. Maddox, though I had the situation well in hand. Jedediah dismounted, scanning the horizon to ensure the Clement gang was truly departing. They'd have killed you without blinking, Miss Goodwin. Or worse. Perhaps, she conceded. But I'm not as helpless as I appear. She gestured toward the cabin. Would you care for some coffee? It's the least I can offer. Against his better judgment, Jedediah found himself accepting. The cabin's interior was sparse but surprisingly orderly given its state just days ago. A small fire burned in the hearth, and the scent of fresh bread filled the single room. Sheriff Tanner hired you to watch over me, Pearl stated as she poured the coffee into a chipped cup. Jedediah didn't bother denying it. For 2 weeks. After that, you're on your own. She nodded, seemingly unperturbed. That should be sufficient time for me to get properly settled. She handed him the cup. You think I'm a fool for coming here. I think you're going to get yourself killed, he replied bluntly. This land doesn't forgive mistakes. Neither does Boston, Pearl said with a small smile. Just different kinds of dangers. She sat across from him at the rough-hewn table. My brother James believed in this place. He called it his promised land in his letters. I couldn't let his dream die with him. Dreams don't mean much out here, Jedediah muttered. On the contrary, Pearl replied. I believe dreams are all that sustain us sometimes. She studied him openly. What sustains you, Mr. Maddox? The question caught him off guard. Revenge, he answered honestly, surprising himself. Pearl didn't flinch at his answer. And when that's accomplished, what then? Jedediah had no response. He'd never considered a what then. His life had narrowed to a singular purpose after finding his wife and son slaughtered. The future extended only as far as the next man on his list of those responsible. The storm's coming in, he said instead, rising abruptly. You should secure anything that might blow away. Pearl accepted the change of subject gracefully. Thank you for the warning. Will you be nearby if the Clement gang returns? I've got a camp in the foothills, Jedediah replied, already moving toward the door. Fire 3 shots if there's trouble. Over the following days, a strange routine developed. Jedediah would arrive each morning, ostensibly to check the property, and find Pearl already hard at work. Sometimes he would watch silently. Other times, against his better judgment, he would find himself helping repairing the barn roof, digging post holes for a new corral, or clearing stones from the small plot she intended for a vegetable garden. They spoke little at first, but gradually Pearl began to draw him out with questions about the land, the weather patterns, the native plants that might be useful. She never pressed about his past, never seemed disturbed by his reputation, and treated him with the same quiet respect she showed everyone. One evening, as they sat on the porch after a long day of work, Pearl noticed him wincing as he rotated his shoulder. You're injured, she observed. Old wound, Jedediah dismissed. Acts up sometimes. Without asking permission, Pearl moved behind him and placed her hands on his shoulder, her touch firm but gentle as she worked the knotted muscles. Jedediah tensed initially, unaccustomed to being touched, but gradually relaxed under her ministrations. Apache? She asked quietly, her fingers finding the ridge of scar tissue beneath his shirt. Comanche, he corrected. 10 years ago. Pearl's hands stilled momentarily. The same attack that took your family? Jedediah turned sharply. Who told you about that? Mrs. Abernathy mentioned it, Pearl admitted. I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Maddox. Jedediah, he found himself saying. If you're going to put your hands on me, you might as well use my given name. A small smile touched her lips. Jedediah then. And I'm Pearl. That night, riding back to his camp, Jedediah realized with uncomfortable clarity that Pearl Goodwin was becoming more than just an obligation. Her quiet strength, her unwavering faith despite adversity, and her lack of judgment about his past were beginning to penetrate the armor he'd built around himself. The realization troubled him deeply. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got people killed in the territories. Moreover, a woman like Pearl decent, God-fearing, and whole deserved better than a broken man consumed by vengeance. The next morning, Jedediah didn't arrive at the cabin. Instead, he rode to a remote canyon where, according to rumors, 2 of the Comanche warriors responsible for his family's death had been spotted. The lead had come from a trader passing through Redemption Creek, and Jedediah had been waiting for the right moment to investigate. He tracked for 3 days, following signs through the rugged landscape, but found nothing conclusive. On the 4th day, as he was about to give up the search, he spotted smoke rising from a small camp tucked into a box canyon. Approaching cautiously, he identified 2 Comanche warriors, older men now, but their faces burned into his memory from that terrible day a decade ago. Jedediah's hand moved to his revolver, the familiar coldness settling over him as he prepared to complete another step in his decade-long quest for vengeance. He had the perfect vantage point, could take them both before they even realized they were in danger. Yet as he raised his weapon, Pearl's words echoed in his mind. And when that's accomplished, what then? For the first time since embarking on his bloody crusade, Jedediah hesitated. These men deserved to die for what they'd done, he had no doubt about that. But would killing them bring back his wife's smile or his son's laughter? Would it fill the emptiness that had become his constant companion? Before he could resolve his inner conflict, a noise from behind alerted the warriors to his presence. One grabbed a rifle while the other mounted a horse with surprising agility for his age. Jedediah fired, wounding the mounted warrior, but the other escaped into the rocks, returning fire as he fled. A bullet grazed Jedediah's temple, momentarily stunning him. By the time he regained his senses, both warriors had disappeared into the labyrinthine canyon system. Cursing his hesitation, Jedediah pressed a bandana to his bleeding head and began the long journey back toward Redemption Creek. Fever set in by nightfall, the wound becoming infected despite his attempts to clean it. Disoriented and weak, Jedediah somehow managed to stay on his horse, guided more by the animal's instinct than his own faltering senses. In his delirium, he saw his wife and son, heard their voices calling to him, but alongside them, unexpectedly, was Pearl's steady presence. He awoke to the touch of a cool cloth on his forehead and the soft murmur of prayer. Opening his eyes, he found himself in Pearl's cabin, lying on her bed while she tended to his wound. "Welcome back," she said quietly, relief evident in her eyes. "Your horse brought you here yesterday morning. You've been delirious with fever." Jedediah tried to sit up but found himself too weak. "The Clement gang haven't been seen," Pearl assured him. "Rest now. The infection's breaking, but you need time to heal." For 3 days, Jedediah drifted between consciousness and fevered dreams. Each time he woke, Pearl was there offering water, changing bandages, or simply sitting beside him, reading aloud from her Bible in a soothing voice that anchored him against the pull of delirium. On the 4th day, the fever broke completely, leaving him weak but clear-headed. Pearl helped him sit up against the pillows and brought him a bowl of venison stew. "You shot this yourself?" he asked, surprised by the quality of the meal. Pearl nodded. "I told you I wasn't helpless, Jedediah. My father taught all his children to hunt, even his daughters. He believed in preparation." As strength returned to his limbs, Jedediah found himself sharing more with Pearl than he had with anyone in years. He told her about his life before the attack, how he'd been a rancher with dreams of building something substantial to pass on to his son. He spoke of his wife Sarah's kindness, his son Matthew's curious nature, and the future that had been stolen from them all. Pearl listened without judgment, offering neither empty platitudes nor useless sympathy. When he finally fell silent, she took his hand in hers, her touch both grounding and comforting. "Grief changes us," she said softly. "When my parents died of influenza and then James of consumption, I felt as though God had abandoned me entirely. I was angry, questioned everything I'd been taught to believe." "What changed?" Jedediah asked. Pearl's eyes met his. "Nothing dramatic, just the slow realization that my anger wasn't bringing them back, and that living half a life wasn't honoring their memory." The simplicity of her answer struck something deep within him. "I don't know how to stop," he admitted, the confession torn from somewhere he'd kept locked away. "The rage is all I have left." "No," Pearl said firmly. "It's just all you've allowed yourself to have." As Jedediah recovered, a shift occurred between them. The professional distance he'd maintained gave way to something more complex and fragile. They began to work the land together, repairing fences, planting the garden, and bringing order to the long-neglected property. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant hues. Sometimes they talked Pearl of her hopes for the property, Jedediah of the land's seasonal rhythms and the wildlife that inhabited it. Other times, they simply existed in comfortable silence, a luxury Jedediah hadn't experienced in years. A month after his injury, the Clement gang returned in force. Jedediah spotted them approaching from the North Ridge while he was mending the corral. 6 riders, heavily armed and moving with purpose. "Pearl," he called, his voice tight, "get inside and bar the door." She appeared from the garden, wiping soil from her hands. One look at his face told her all she needed to know. Without argument, she retrieved her shotgun from the porch and moved quickly to secure the cabin. Jedediah positioned himself behind the water trough, revolver ready. Jonas Clement rode at the head of the group, his expression hardening when he spotted Jedediah. "Still playing protector, Maddox?" he called out. "Thought you'd have moved on by now." "State your business, Clement," Jedediah replied coldly. "The lady's not interested in company." Clement's laugh was ugly. "We're not here for social calls. This property sits on a nice, secluded trail perfect for moving certain goods without drawing attention. We used it regularly before your lady friend showed up." "Find another route," Jedediah said, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Now that's just bad business," Clement replied, signaling to his men, who fanned out around the clearing. "We're taking back what's ours, Maddox. Only question is whether you and the woman leave in one piece or several." The first shot came from one of Clement's men, kicking up dust near Jedediah's feet. He returned fire with deadly accuracy, dropping the man from his saddle. Chaos erupted as bullets flew from multiple directions. Jedediah took cover behind the barn, picking his shots carefully, aware that he was outnumbered. From the cabin, Pearl's shotgun boomed, forcing 2 riders to retreat from their approach to the house. Jedediah felt a surge of pride at her courage, followed immediately by fear for her safety. If anything happened to her because of him. The thought drove him forward with renewed determination. Moving quickly between cover, He managed to wound another of Clement's men before taking a bullet to his thigh. Pain exploded through his leg, but adrenaline kept him upright and fighting. The gunfight seemed to stretch endlessly, though it likely lasted only minutes. When the dust settled, 2 of Clement's men lay dead, and another severely wounded. Clement himself and the remaining men retreated, firing parting shots as they galloped away. "This isn't over, Maddox," Clement shouted over his shoulder. "Not by a long shot." Jedediah slumped against the barn wall, blood soaking his trouser leg. Pearl rushed to his side, her face pale but composed as she examined the wound. "Inside," she ordered, helping him to his feet. "We need to stop the bleeding." Once again, Jedediah found himself under Pearl's care, though this time he remained conscious as she extracted the bullet, cleaned the wound, and bandaged his leg with practiced efficiency. "Where did a Boston lady learn such skills?" he asked through gritted teeth. 2 years as a nurse during the war," Pearl replied, tying off the bandage. "I volunteered at a field hospital in Virginia." The revelation added another layer to his understanding of this remarkable woman. No wonder she faced frontier hardships with such resilience. She had already witnessed humanity at its worst and most desperate. "They'll be back," Jedediah warned once she had finished. "Clement doesn't give up easily, especially when his pride's been wounded." Pearl sat beside him, her hands still stained with his blood. "Then we'll be ready." "We?" Jedediah questioned. "Pearl, this isn't your fight. This land isn't worth dying for." Her eyes flashed with sudden fire. "This land is my brother's final gift to me. It's my future and my purpose. I won't abandon it because of men like Jonas Clement." Jedediah studied her determined face, realizing with startling clarity that somewhere along the way, his motivation for protecting her had changed. It was no longer about the sheriff's payment or even basic decency. It was about her. About the way she had begun to heal parts of him he'd thought long dead. "Then we prepare," he said finally. "And when they come, we end this." The next week was spent fortifying the property. Despite his injured leg, Jedediah worked alongside Pearl to barricade windows, create defensive positions, and prepare for the inevitable attack. They took turns keeping watch, sleeping in shifts, always alert for approaching danger. During these long nights, their conversations deepened. Pearl spoke of her brother's dream for the land, not just a ranch, but a way station for settlers, a place of rest and renewal on the harsh frontier. Jedediah shared stories of the territories before the war, when possibilities still seemed to outweigh peril. On the 6th night, as they sat by the fire, Pearl asked the question he'd been dreading. "When this is over, when the Clement gang is dealt with, what will you do?" Jedediah stared into the flames. A month ago, the answer would have been simple: continue his hunt for the remaining Comanche warriors on his list. But now uncertainty clouded his purpose. "I don't know," he admitted. "For 10 years, vengeance has been my only goal. I'm not sure I remember how to live for anything else." Pearl's hand found his in the firelight. "Perhaps it's time to find out." Her touch sent warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the fire. When he looked up, the expression in her eyes mirrored feelings he'd been trying to deny: affection, understanding, and something deeper that both terrified and exhilarated him. Before he could respond, the sound of a snapping twig outside brought them both to alertness. Jedediah moved to the window, peering cautiously into the darkness. "Riders coming," he whispered. "At least 8 of them." Pearl extinguished the lamp without being told, moving silently to retrieve her shotgun. "Clement." "Yes." "And he's brought reinforcements." Jedediah checked his revolver. "Get to the root cellar. There's a trapdoor that leads." "I'm staying," Pearl interrupted firmly. "This is my home, Jedediah. I won't hide while you fight for it." He wanted to argue, to insist on her safety, but the determination in her eyes told him it would be futile. Instead, he pressed his revolver into her hand and took the shotgun. "Better range," he explained. "Stay low and don't take unnecessary risks." The first attack came as a volley of bullets through the windows, shattering glass and splintering wood. Jedediah and Pearl kept to the shadows, conserving ammunition, waiting for the inevitable moment when Clement's men would try to rush the cabin. When it came, Jedediah was ready. The shotgun blast caught the first man through the door squarely in the chest, throwing him backward into his companions. Pearl fired from her position near the hearth, her aim steady despite the chaos. For several terrifying minutes, the cabin became a storm of gunfire and shouting. Smoke filled the small space, stinging their eyes and making it difficult to see. Jedediah moved constantly, firing and reloading, aware that their ammunition wouldn't last forever. A bullet grazed his arm. Another shattered a jar near Pearl's head, showering her with glass and preserves. Still, they held their ground, their determination matching the desperation of their attackers. Then, unexpectedly, new gunfire erupted from outside, but it wasn't directed at the cabin. Shouts of confusion rose from Clement's men, followed by the sound of retreating hoofbeats. "Sheriff!" a familiar voice called. "Maddox! Miss Goodwin! You alive in there?" Relief flooded through Jedediah as he recognized Sheriff Tanner's voice. "We're here," he called back, lowering the shotgun. "Clement got away," Tanner replied as he appeared in the doorway. "But we wounded several of his men. A trader passing through town heard about their plans to hit this place tonight and rode straight to my office." In the aftermath, as Tanner and his deputies cleared away the bodies and tracked the wounded outlaws, Jedediah found Pearl sitting quietly on the porch steps. Her dress was torn and dirty. A small cut on her cheek trickled blood, but her eyes were clear and steady as she gazed at the dawn breaking over the eastern hills. He sat beside her, his body aching from exertion and injury, but his mind clearer than it had been in years. "It's over," he said softly. Pearl nodded, her gaze still on the horizon. "For now." "Clement won't stop," Jedediah admitted. "Not as long as he's alive." "Then we'll face that when it comes," Pearl replied simply. She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "You never answered my question from before. What will you do now?" Jedediah took a deep breath, letting go of the last threads of the rage that had defined him for so long. "I'm thinking of settling down. This land needs a lot of work, and a woman shouldn't have to do it alone." A smile slowly spread across Pearl's face, transforming her features with quiet joy. "Are you offering to be my ranch hand, Jedediah Maddox?" "I'm offering to be whatever you need me to be," he replied honestly. "Partner, protector, husband, if you'll have a man as damaged as me." Pearl's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "We're all damaged in some way. Faith isn't about being perfect. It's about believing in the possibility of healing." She leaned closer, her voice soft but certain. "And I have faith in you, Jedediah. I always have." As the sun rose fully over the land that had witnessed so much bloodshed and pain, Jedediah Maddox felt the last of his rage dissolve into something he hadn't dared hope for in a decade piece. With Pearl's hand in his and her unwavering faith lighting the way forward, he could finally see a future beyond vengeance. 3 months later, they were married under the juniper tree beside the cabin, with Sheriff Tanner and a few townsfolk from Redemption Creek in attendance. Pearl wore a simple white dress with wildflowers in her hair, and Jedediah stood tall in a new black suit, his eyes no longer cold and empty but warm with purpose and love. They built their life together on that once cursed land, transforming it step by step into the haven James Goodwin had envisioned. The cabin expanded into a proper house, the barn was rebuilt, and cattle gradually populated the corral. As Pearl had dreamed, They established a way station for travelers, offering safe respite on the dangerous frontier. Jonas Clement eventually made his final mistake, attempting to rob a military payroll and dying in a hail of army bullets. The news brought not satisfaction to Jedediah, but a quiet relief that one threat to their future had been eliminated. As for the Comanche warriors who had haunted his dreams for so long, Jedediah made a different choice. With Pearl's support, he traveled to meet with them on neutral ground, not seeking vengeance but understanding. The conversation was difficult, painful, but necessary, acknowledging the losses on both sides of a conflict that had destroyed too many lives. In the spring of their second year together, their daughter was born, a small, fierce girl with her mother's auburn hair and her father's hazel eyes. They named her Hope, for what had been restored to them both through their unlikely union. On summer evenings, when the day's work was done, Jedediah would sit on the porch with Pearl beside him and their daughter in his arms, watching the sunset paint the western sky. In those quiet moments, with the woman whose faith had stilled his rage and shown him a path to redemption, Jedediah Maddox finally found the peace he'd thought forever lost on a blood-soaked day 10 years before. And when Hope would look up at him with trusting eyes, Jedediah silently renewed the promise he'd made on his wedding day to protect this precious new life with love rather than violence, to build rather than destroy, and to honor the second chance that Pearl's unwavering faith had given him.